Thank you so much, Azira, for that introduction. So everybody, my name is Erin Kim, and I'm Communications Director for New Harvest, and I'm very honored to be here with such a great group of people to kick off the section on cellular agriculture today. So I think that the way that makes the most sense to begin is to tell our story right from the beginning, which takes us all the way back to 1932, when Winston Churchill had an essay published in Popular Mechanics magazine called 50 Years Hence. And in it, he describes a future in which humans get to enjoy wireless phones and TV like we have now, materials 30 times stronger than steel, and of course, chicken breasts and chicken wings, all made without what he calls the absurdity of growing the entire animal. So it was a really optimistic piece, and it was inspired by the incredible technological and scientific advances that had happened in the agricultural and industrial revolutions. But by the time the actual 80s rolled around, although we'd figured out commercial aviation, nuclear weapons, and we'd landed humans on the moon, we still hadn't quite figured out cultured meat. So fast forward to the early 2000s, when Jason Matheny, who founded New Harvest, was just a student. He was studying public health, and he took a trip to India, and he visited a slaughterhouse there, and he was someone who was already well aware of the detrimental effects of large-scale animal agriculture in the US, mostly because of the incredible amounts of antibiotics which are supplied to the billions of animals in the food system which are killed each year. And he saw the rising demand in Asia and realized that if the rest of the world were to start consuming meat and animal products at the levels that we in America are doing, that the whole world would be in quite a dangerous position. And at this time, a new emerging science called tissue engineering was starting to take hold, and that's where you're trying to grow human organ tissue for medical use, but no one was yet making a large concerted effort in applying knowledge that was being generated there into animal tissues for food production. And so for that reason, he decided to found New Harvest in 2004. And from 2004 until 2013, he was a student, and he was rising in the ranks at IARPA. So he was only able to dedicate time to New Harvest on a part-time evenings and weekends basis. So New Harvest was kind of on the back burner until about 2013. But meanwhile, in 2009, there was a student, an undergrad cell biology major, who was taking a meat science course as an elective, and there she was kind of getting enthralled by the idea of cultured meat, so much so that she decided to write a paper laying out the basics of how to get to mass production. So that paper was eventually published in a journal called Innovative Food Science and Emerging Technologies. And Jason invited that writer, Isha Datar, to become executive director. Well, he invited her to apply for the position once he realized that someone needed to be working on this full time, and once there was enough funds in the bank to actually pay a salary for someone full time. So once New Harvest had its first full-time employee, this is what New Harvest looked like. It was just a single laptop in a home office in Toronto, Canada, where Isha had just finished a master's in biotech policy. And that first year consisted of her just getting the lay of the land of what few efforts in cultured meat-related research there really were at the time around the world. And so she was spending a lot of time on the phone with scientists, donors, volunteers like myself at the time, about how to actually build a new discipline from scratch. And later that year, cultured meat kind of got its big break because a Dutch scientist named Mark Post, he applied some known methods of tissue engineering to bovine muscle cells, and he was able to culture about 20,000 cow muscle fibers by hand, and he combined them together to create this hamburger, which was, it was colored red with beet juice because it was cultured. It actually came out kind of yellow because it didn't have blood in it. And he used egg as a binding ingredient, and it was fried with butter and seasoning on live television. And it really captured the attention of the world because it proved the concept that you could, in fact, grow animal tissue from culture and eat it. But unfortunately, at this time, there still wasn't enough funding for a true industry to really take off. So one of the first things that New Harvest did with Isha as executive director was to provide Dr. Post with some more additional funding to continue his research after that burger was made. So the next year, in 2014, Isha was approached by two students, Parimal Gandhi and Ryan Pandya, who had separately approached Isha with the idea of creating dairy milk proteins without the cow. And coincidentally, Isha had already been alerted to an accelerator opportunity in Ireland, and so the three of them thought, why not apply as the New Harvest Dairy Project? And so they went through that accelerator program, and that's how Moofree, the company that is aiming to make dairy products without cows, came to be. They rebranded as Perfect Day Foods last summer and are still working on getting products like yogurt, cheese, and ice cream out to consumers, hopefully someday soon. And later that same year, Isha met Arturo Elizondo and David Anchel, an entrepreneur and a scientist, who both shared the idea of creating not just eggs, not just without chickens, but also without the yolks, which are often thrown away because the demand here for egg whites is greater. And they, this time, decided to go through the Indie Bio Accelerator, which is just a few blocks away from here in San Francisco. And they are currently still working on getting their cellular agriculture egg product out on the market. So as someone who's been in this industry for a few years now, I get a lot of joy out of reflecting on how everything I've just mentioned up until this point, it all happened before there was even a word to describe it. So we today are using the word cellular agriculture, and groups like NASA and the National Academies of Sciences are throwing it around, but this Facebook screenshot, it just shows a little bit of the discussion that gave rise to the actual term. All this stuff was starting to happen in 2015, and we realized we needed a way to communicate the idea of growing and harvesting animal products, not by slaughtering entire animals, but just by growing direct cells or the products of those cells as the building blocks for consumer products. And so the conversation went longer than what's shown here, but that's sort of how that came to be. It was sort of crowd-sourced, I guess. So cellular agriculture came to define the production of agricultural products, whether those are food or non-edible materials, but made from cell cultures rather than whole plants or animals. And what we know of cellular agriculture today can be broken down into two basic categories. So the first is acellular products, which include things like casein, gelatin, vanillin, omega-3 fatty acids, and ovalbumin, all of which are organic materials, organic molecules made by cells, but which themselves contain no living material. And then the second category is meat, leather, and any kind of skin, fur, and entire organs which are made up of living or once living cells. So by the end of 2015, we realized that something needed to change. New Harvest had been out in the world talking about the potential benefits of cellular agriculture for a while, but we realized that it wasn't enough to just be talking about the possibilities and then hoping that someone was going to magically start funding this. We were starting to see a lot of the predictions that were being made about when cultured meat would be available on the market start to pass us by. And there were a few really cool prototypes being made, but there were still no market-ready products yet out on the market. And unfortunately, nearly a decade after it was published, this very basic four-step process that Isha laid out in her 2009 paper was still basically what was known. There wasn't much more than that, at least in the public realm, that was really being generated in the industry. And so that's why New Harvest took a little bit of a pivot away from activities like launching startups and more towards funding open academic research through our fellowship program. And it's through our fellowship program that we've gotten to know just basic foundational science, like how each of the different types of cells behave, whether they're from a cow, a pig, a chicken, or a specific type of fish, or whether it's a muscle or a fat cell. And although there is more work being done on fat now, even now, most of the work is still focused mostly on muscle. And so I really want to stress that science can be uncertain. It's especially when you're working with living material, and it takes a very long time. And along the way of even just the few years that we've been working at this, we've learned that this type of work comes with a lot of challenges. So cells die very easily once they realize that they're not inside a living body with an immune system and a vasculatory system to fight infection and to transport nutrients and carry away waste and things like that. And so each of our researchers has accumulated some firsthand experience with this. Cells also sometimes mature past the point where you need to get them to be for a particular experiment, and so you'll have to start all over again. And they also get contaminated very easily. And all of these things are very frustrating and also very expensive. And so as an organization that's very much focused on science, we have to be patient, focused, and also not take ourselves too seriously. Today, it's 2017, and New Harvest has grown from just the one person in the home office with the laptop to a full-time staff of 3, with a total of 6 researchers that we're funding currently in Canada, the US, and in the UK at the moment. And as communications director, I try to share our research progress in a way that's not just honest and grounded in science, but also in a way that's fun and accessible. And as the only non-scientist in the organization, I am very empathetic to the concerns that a lot of people have about this field. I myself, when I first heard about cultured meat over 10 years ago now, I was disgusted, and I did not like the idea, and so if you told me that one day I'd be working in this field, I probably would not have believed you. But it was over time and through education and exposure that I slowly became more open to the concept. A big part of our communications effort is in sharing the progress of our work through our social media channels. We're on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and also through our newsletter and donor updates. And that's because to the non-scientific public, sometimes science can seem a little bit like magic that happens behind closed doors. It can be used for good and evil. Often in medicine, it's thought of as a good thing, but as soon as it's applied to food, it becomes scary and evil. And so I like to think of us as blasting those doors wide open, inviting people in to see the day-to-day realities of scientific research as it happens, and just including all kinds of voices in the field and asking really important questions. It's been really exciting to share some of the milestones over the years, and so as one really cool example, I included a photo of a small piece of pure turkey muscle culture that one of our researchers, Marie, produced last fall. And prior to that, there hadn't been any known efforts to produce any cultured poultry before, so that was really exciting. And Marie actually decided herself, we did not ask her to do this, she tasted that little bit of turkey, and she says that it tasted just like KFC. However, she is a vegan, so I'm not sure when the last time she actually had KFC was. And along with funding research, another core activity that we do is holding an annual cellular agriculture conference. And that's because as a donor-funded nonprofit, New Harvest is viewed as the most accessible point of entry to this field. And people often ask us questions that don't necessarily fall within the scope of our mission and activities, like how will cultured meat be regulated is the big one, how should it be marketed, and things like that. And so we took this year's conference as an opportunity to host some conversations about regulatory pathways, how to communicate science in the food industry, and consumer side considerations for product design and things like that. And we and I take a lot of pride in being unafraid of difficult but necessary conversations. And another one of the talks that we organized was a very long-awaited one, and a very important one that quite frankly should have happened a long time ago, but it was between cultured meat producers Mark Post and David Kay from Memphis Meats, and 2 farmers, Iltud from Wales, who is he's a small artisanal meat producer, and Richard Fowler on the right there. He's from New Zealand, and he's a dairy farmer. And so we had a really important conversation about how cellular agriculture might potentially impact their industries. And so if you want to see how that conversation went, that will be uploaded along with all of the other talks in a couple of weeks online. For a look into what cultured meat products could someday look like, I want to highlight a really cool speculative concept that was unveiled at our conference, of course, and it was by a group called the Future Market, and this takeout menu, unfortunately the font is too small, but it has classic dishes that we already know and love in both traditional meat and cultured meat forms. The cultured meat dishes are priced just a little bit higher, so that was like a nice little realistic touch that they added there. And I just thought this was so much fun and so well done because it combined what we know, what's familiar, with what's just a little bit out of reach, and it was just done in a way that is plausible but still really exciting. And to end off on some key takeaways, I want to emphasize again that we are a nonprofit. We're only in existence, and the work that we do is only possible because about 600 people worldwide support our work, and that's mostly individuals, some companies, some foundational support, but it really is mostly people who are just excited about this. Because our research is open source, companies, investors, donors, prospective consumers, and critics, which is a really important piece, all have access to the work that we do, and I think that is super important for such a nascent field like this. And so if anyone has more questions about our work or wants to get involved in some way, I'm really happy to talk more about this after the talks conclude. Thank you so much.